You are a sought-after detective traveling to the University of Money to find out what's missing and what went wrong. Everything appears normal, but what has gone wrong? To figure things out, you will enroll and experience the curriculum. On the train to the university, you read from the dossier that was given to you. It is about Ben Franklin. As a young man, Ben grew up in Boston, traveled and lived a while in Philadelphia and then London before returning to make Philadelphia and Pennsylvania his home. He loved these English colonies in America and England. He wanted people to have a good life. And like you, he took up the call to become aware of this crucial mystical power centered around money. In Philadelphia on April 3, 1729, at the age of 23, Ben Franklin shared his report to all the people. Our debates possessed me so fully of the subject that I wrote and printed an anonymous pamphlet on it entitled, The Nature and Necessity of a Paper Currency. This report was so powerful that it laid the foundation for immediate monetary justice, which became the fighting cause for the American Revolution later. You get to the university and rush to your seat in your first-year class.
So my name is Joe Polito, and I've taken enough economics and finance university to understand experts, but that background is not necessary to the monetary reform movement, or certainly not to pressure. We don't need it to pressure our students, our politicians, for the betterment of the people. Today is for, as Stephen has said, today is for the curious about this notion of reforming the monetary system to enable us to address many of the issues that fall. There are many active groups seeking solutions for issues like affordable housing, healthcare, education, infrastructure, a sustainable planet, unemployment, poverty, homelessness, food banks, and living wage jobs. Individually, many of us relate these concerns to what we want for our loved ones, particularly the youth or the future of our nation. Most of us have trouble understanding the reformers because we don't know how the money system works. Money is like electricity. We use both money and electricity every day, but they're largely a mystery to us. How many of us can appreciate what electricity is? How many of us could explain how it works, how it drives an electric motor or makes a refrigerator work? How many of us can explain how money is originated, how the supply expands as the economy grows? So let us start with what you need to know to urge your politicians to use a much better policy to improve the lives of the people, economy of this nation. History is the avenue I've chosen for today, and concrete, it creates a narrative, and it's easiest for the politicians to understand. During the Civil War, Lincoln faced a financial crisis. He did not have the funds to mobilize the resources necessary to fight the war, nor could he acquire them. So he repeated the practice of the colonies advanced by Benjamin Franklin.
Metal coins to trade for goods. Franklin was a big supporter of the colonies printing their own paper money. In 1757, Franklin was sent to London. He ended up staying for the next 18 years here, nearly until the start of the American Revolution. During this period, the American colonies began to issue their own money. Called colonial scrip, the endeavor was very successful. It provided a reliable medium of exchange, and it also helped to provide a feeling of unity between the colonies. Remember, colonial scrip was just paper money, debt-free money, printed in the public interest, and not backed by gold or silver coin. In other words, it was a totally fiat currency. One day, officials of the Bank of England asked Franklin how he would account for the newfound prosperity of the colonies. Without hesitation, he replied,
"That is simple. In the colonies, we issue our own money. It is called colonial scrip. We issue it in proper proportion to the demands of trade and industry to make the products pass easily from the producers to the consumers. In this manner, creating for ourselves our own paper money, we control its purchasing power, and we have no interest to pay to no one."
This was just common sense to Franklin, but you can imagine the impact it had on the Bank of England. America had learned the secret of money, and that genie had to be returned to its bottle as soon as possible. As a result, Parliament hurriedly passed the Currency Act of 1764. This prohibited colonial officials from issuing their own money and ordered them
It went in my ears now.
taxes in gold or silver.
If you were
coin.
interested, I can bring it back.
In other words, it forced the colonies on a gold or silver standard. For those who still believe that a gold standard is the answer for America's current monetary problems, look what happened to America after that. Writing in his autobiography, Franklin said,
In 1 year, the conditions were so reversed that the era of prosperity ended and a depression set in to such an extent that the streets of the colonies were filled with unemployed.
Franklin claims that this was even the basic cause for the American Revolution. As Franklin put it in his autobiography,
The colonies would gladly have borne a little tax on tea and other matters had it not been that England took away from the colonies their money, which created unemployment and dissatisfaction. The inability of the colonists to get the power to issue their own money permanently out of the hands of George III and the international bankers was the prime reason for the Revolutionary War.
by the time the first shots were fired in Lexington, Massachusetts, on April 19, 1775, the colonies had been drained of gold and silver coin by British taxation. As a result, the Continental government had no choice but to print money to finance the war. The same currency had worked so well 20 years earlier during times of peace that the Bank of England had Parliament outlaw it.
Lincoln repeated that constitutionally acceptable process of issuing money, known as greenbacks at that time. And after the war, many wanted to retain a superior monetary system, helping the nation thrive. In terms of the constitutionality, here it is in the Constitution, right here, to coin money, the value thereof, and a foreign coin, and fix the standard of weights and measures. And it's really interesting that notion of fixing the standard of weights and measures is combined with that line, because we're talking about a public good, a national program. And whether it's determining standards of weights and measures or determining the nature of the money system, essential for the federal government to do that. The Greenback Party was established to make the policy change permanent. They ran presidential candidates and were pretty successful. They at one point, I think they had about 10% of the vote in the election. Later, Thomas Edison and Henry Ford, who lived through that era, in fact, I'm pretty sure Edison lived through the Civil War as a teenager. And so they were very familiar with that whole debate. And in 1921, December 1921, they advocated for debt-free money. This is a PDF of the New York Times, and Ford hopes to use Muscle Shoal as a step to win wars. He wants the government to issue non-interest notes for the cost of gold. And by the way, that is also something that Keynes advocated. He was a monetary reformer. It was a two-part interview, by the way. I have a link to that as well. And I'll make this document available on the website for the Conf. During the Depression, a great number of economists returned to this vision as a way to end the crisis. After the war, one of the students of those economists, the Nobel laureate Milton Friedman, said revenue shortfalls would be financed by the creation of money, that is, the issue of non-interest-bearing securities. And it would not issue interest-bearing securities. Reformers around the world have looked back at such history and expert advice and the Constitution. They ask a simple question of our leaders, which we should be asking. 1939, just before World War II broke out, Canadian federal representative asked it of the governor of the Bank of Canada. Will you tell me why a government with power to create money should borrow that which Parliament can create itself back at interest to the point of national bankruptcy? And we're still asking the same question. Governor Towers responded, if Parliament wants to change the form of operating the banking system, then certainly that is within the power of monetary reformers trying to get them to. Indirectly, the discussion completely supported what Lincoln did. Another question said, so far as war is concerned, to defend the integrity of the nation, there'll be no difficulty in raising the means of financing whatever those requirements may be. Ours replied, the limit of the possibilities depend on men and materials. In other words, the real resources, not money. Money is not in short supply. Don't want it to be. Another question that the representative asked, his name was McGear. Where you have an abundance of men and materials, you have no difficulty under the present banking system in putting forth the medium of exchange that is necessary to put the men and materials to work in defense of the realm. Mr. Tower said, that's right. Would you admit that anything physically possible and desirable can be made financially possible? And he agreed. And again, this is something that Keynes said. Anything we can do, we can afford. This exchange took place 5 years before President Roosevelt's proposal for a second Bill of Rights. World War II proved Towers was right. That period was the closest we have come to monetary reform in the modern era, with what was essentially a zero interest rate policy. The resulting economic miracle has been described by the award-winning historian Doris Goodwin in The Way We Won America's Economic Breakthrough During World War II. There's also an academic paper that describes a similar dynamic for Canada during the period. An historian does a much better job of explaining such things, and it's the kind of thing that the politicians need. That success permitted FDR to propose a second Bill of Rights. It's nicely explained in Wikipedia, and they even have the pertinent clip.
Certain economic truths have become accepted as self-evident. A second Bill of Rights, under which a new basis of security and prosperity can be established for all, regardless of station or race or creed. Among these are the right to a useful and remunerative job in the industries or shops or farms or mines throughout the nation. The right to earn enough to provide adequate food and clothing and recreation. The right of every farmer to raise and sell his products at a return which will give him and his family a decent living. The right of every businessman, large and small, to trade in an atmosphere of freedom, freedom from unfair competition and domination by monopolies at home or abroad. The right of every family to a decent home. The right to adequate medical care and the opportunity to achieve and enjoy good health. The right to adequate protection from the economic fears of old age, sickness, accident, and unemployment. The right to a good education. All of these rights spell security.
I think some of our members would, if they had FDR with them here today, they would have him add a sustainable planet. Economic right as well. Um, to understand this, why we were really close to monetary reform here, we need to look at some of the dynamics that took place during the war. This is a graphic of federal debt held from 1900. And as you can see, the debt spiked considerably during the war. And then it dropped off very rapidly, shrank away. And what happened was the Federal Reserve worked with the government and the banks to keep rates essentially at zero or even less. And we can see that in the next graph. Global interest rates for both the First World War and the Second World War, the interest rates were below zero. Why? Because war brings inflation, and because in both cases rates were very modest. The real interest rates were below zero, and that it's the interest rate, the compounding effect of the interest rate, drives up debt. And until 1970, 75, interest, the government debt as a percentage of GDP. A couple of related graphs here. You can see in this graph that inflation went from very modest amount to up to 20% in World War I. So if you had 3% or 4% in interest rates, then the debt was very, very manageable. Here in this graph, we can see that from 1914 to 1920, interest rates, or the average inflation rate, climbed rapidly from 1%, 17 in 1917, 18, 1918. And then, interestingly enough, right after the war, there was still high inflation, 1919, 1920, and eventually they actually experienced a deflation. And after the war, the interest rates did not climb up super high, either for the First World War or the Second World War. But after COVID and after the Russian invasion, there was inflation, and the Federal Reserve raised the interest rate. And this history would suggest that that was a mistake and only hurt the economy, hurt the innocent general public, and was an unnecessary. So it's valuable in that regard as well. So in conclusion, there is a simple message you can learn and convey to your politicians, journalists, and friends. Those of us who are new to monetary reform would like to be able to talk to the politicians and influence them, and they can do so in a very simple way. We've learned that from early American colonies and Lincoln greenbacks and the events of World War II, that there are monetary policies which can improve our standard of living, economic opportunity for all, and meet the challenges we inevitably will face. A lesson of our history can address unaffordable housing, neglected infrastructure, homelessness, food banks, tuition and healthcare debt, unemployment, poverty, and inequality, and help to make a sustainable planet. Doris Goodwin nicely summarizes how effective those historical precedents can be. Americans' response to World War II was the most extraordinary mobilization of an idle economy in the history of the world. In the war, 17 million new civilian jobs were created. Industrial productivity increased by 96%, and productivity is an enormous issue in today's world. Corporate profits after taxes doubled. 1944, as a result of wage increases and overtime pay, real weekly wages before taxes in manufacturing were 50% higher. That's just in years. Doris also described the value of another aspect of World War II, a public bank. The federal government, through Reconstruction Finance Corporation, advanced the necessary money to expand factories, often leasing them to industry. The government developed new sources of supply for raw materials and created quick mass transportation. The government also went into the business of producing synthetic rubber and aluminum, as well as other emerging industries, and helped stimulate new technologies. It has been said that this was the largest economic, non-government entity in the United States during it, bigger than any corporation. Originally, we planned to have another member of the team, Gwendolyn Hallsmith, but she could not make it. She's very creative and has a multi-pronged approach to improving the system. One of her YouTube clips illustrates the potential of public bank and corporation.
Welcome, everybody, to Baking for a Better Vermont, or Banking for a Better Vermont, depending on what you prefer. For this, we ask you to consider chocolate chip cookies as a metaphor for all the things that our state tax dollars pay for. Public infrastructure like roads and sewers and bridges. We look at education, healthcare, arts and culture, citizen participation in government. All these great things that our taxes pay for are sweet, just like chocolate chip cookies. And we're ready for dessert. So for that, I present to you our dessert procurement specialist, the Vermont State Legislature.
Yes?
Hello, Mr. Banker.
Hello?
We need some cookies for dessert for all of the people of Vermont, and we heard that you had some.
Mm-hmm. And how many cookies would you like?
People, how many cookies do we need? 100, 200, 300? 200 cookies. We need 200 cookies.
You don't have an account here. You need to open an account before I can get you any cookies.
How many cookies do we need to open an account?
200 cookies?
200 cookies. Okay, hold on. I'll be right back. Let's see.
Yes, at least 200.
Here's 100 cookies. Oh.
Thank you.
And here is 200 cookies.
Well, how many cookies do you need now?
200.
Oh, well, you don't have 200 cookies now because there was a 40 cookie account establishment fee and a 20 cookie fee to send them to you.
What? That's not fair. Give us our cookies back.
Sorry, we're the only bank you're allowed to use.
Where did that rule come from?
Haven't you heard of the golden rule? We have to go. We make the rules.
Well, how are we ever going to get the cookies to the people who need them the most? I guess we have to go back to that same old game.
Yes.
Are we going to raise taxes, or are we going to cut programs? What will it be this year? Cut programs.
Wait! There's another way. It's a better way.
Huh?
Who are you?
Who are you?
I'm a Vermonter. We don't have to choose between raising taxes or cutting programs.
How? We're broke. And he keeps eating all of our cookies.
We form our own bank, a state bank, a Vermont state bank.
A Vermont state bank?
Yeah, just like they have in North Dakota. The farmers there set it up 100 years ago. Back in 1919, the same year our farmers set up the Cabot Creamery Cooperative. The farmers were fed up with rich out-of-staters giving them unfair prices and foreclosing on their farms whenever they had a bad year.
Wait, so how would this help us with the state budget?
In just the last 10 years, the profits from the North Dakota State Bank have provided over $500 million in revenues to the state. That's a lot of cookies.
Wait. And a Vermont state bank would help farmers too?
Yeah, lower interest rates, plus revenues for programs like water quality protection, organic conversion, more money for farmers, more money for farms. And a Vermont State Bank would help a lot of other people too.
Like who?
Vermont students who are being crushed by student debt.
And Vermont towns and communities that want to rebuild their roads and bridges and renovate their schools.
And businesses that need credit for expansion and startup and expansion. And for the old soldiers home in Bennington, too, and all kinds of things.
And for Vermont homeowners who need a mortgage and don't want to see our state in the red anymore.
Really? It could do all that?
Yeah, a state bank operated by and for Vermonters.
Ah, literally bringing our dough back home.
Exactly. You got it.
Bah! Humbug! No! No, you can't do that! The dough is all ours! We have the recipe. We're the only one who know how to make these cookies. Don't you understand that? We got the dough, so we make the rules. Remember the golden rule!
That is not the golden rule. And the rule in Vermont is that the legislators make the rules. And so, by the power vested in me, by the Vermont State Constitution, and by the people of Vermont, I now declare you the Vermont State Bank.
It's on!
Hey! Cookies for all!
Hooray!
We've got lots and lots of needs and opportunities here in Vermont which will benefit from a public bank. Our tax dollars don't need to pay for multi-million dollars for salaries and private jets to big banker CEOs.
Right on.
Hey, I'll have one.
Filed again.
I'm very happy in signing this bill for the first Vermont state bank. It is in the interest of all Vermonters, no pun intended. But we're going to keep the money in the state. It's going to stay here. It's not going to go to some Yemeni bombing mission by the Saudis and everybody else in the United States. And I want to tell you one thing, Texas, we were the first Republicans, so put that in your pipe and smoke it. Thereby done. It's good to be king.
So Gwen wasn't able to make it, but her. So these successful precedents remind us that the current approach creates paralyzing debt, which accumulates because of revenue shortfalls caused by wars, recession, financial crises, unemployment, natural disasters. The Great Depression, the money was not issued, and the people and the economy suffered terribly. History confirmed Friedman's conclusion for a better way. There was no real interest during World War II or the government debt. For Lincoln, there was none. After World War II, the debt to GDP ratio melted away as we continued to fund a full employment economy with very low rates, investing in housing and productive capacity and infrastructure until about 1970, when several events allowed the outdated economic schools to press for austerity, which was good for the plutocrats, but not to 99%. Had an inferior version, World War II approached 2008, 2020, and that has to change. The banks talked the authorities into paying interest on the reserves. And that has been another way for the banks to acquire unearned income and make excess profit.
Maybe while you're doing that, Joe, does anybody have a clarifying question? Is anyone curious about something that Joe's brought up, or any thoughts for us freshman monetary detectives?
You know, I thought it was interesting when Doris Goodwin there said that a lot of these things were done during the war, major accomplishments, you know, a tremendous number of jobs were created and that sort of thing. And it just occurred to me that all of this could have been done absent a war, so long as everybody was on the same page, because really, if everybody's on the same page, it's amazing what the nation can, you know, decide to do. And the thing is, when the United States was attacked at Pearl Harbor, everybody was on the same page, you know, ready to maybe accept some changes and a little bit of hardship and some faith in government to get the job done. But all of this stuff could have been done as long as, you know, there was some plan to do it and the citizens would buy into it. It was my observation.
She makes that very point, John. She makes that very point at the end of her essay. Let me just conclude with one last paragraph. The great Aristotle concluded over 2,000 years ago that money was a creature of the law. For us, the foundation of our laws and legislature is the Constitution, which says the federal government is responsible for issuing the money. That is why the Canadian federal representative could ask, will you tell me why a government with the power to create money should borrow that which Parliament can create itself back at interest to the point of national bankruptcy? This little introductory section has just been to make that point, that we can urge the politicians switch things up that and accomplish all the things we need to do, as John has just. Carl, you have your hand up.
Yes, pardon me, I'm a little bit congested, so I hope I can be understood. Can I add just some information about founder Roger Sherman and his perspective on money?
Go ahead.
Yes, I am sympathetic with the greenback concept. I think we find that, well, in the example of the U.S., there's been a perpetual pressure to have a privately owned and controlled central bank, the first, second, now with the Fed, the third central bank, wherein the economy is put to use for purposes other than what most people would hope for, and even towards, global ambitions that some behind the scenes may have. But Roger Sherman, founder, is responsible for the monetary words in the Constitution: no state shall make anything but gold and silver coin a tender in payment of debts. And the essential document from which that came, and the cause of his thought in that respect, is titled it was written in 1752, titled A Caveat Against Injustice, or an inquiry into the evils of a fluctuating medium of exchange. And Roger Sherman experienced as a Connecticut businessman that he was owed money that he thought would be payable in Connecticut script, but a court actually agreed with the other party that they could pay the debt off with Rhode Island money. And Rhode Island was sort of the criminal amongst all the colonies. It was inflating its currency its script much more than the other colonies. So Roger Sherman realized the redeemability for silver, something of actual value and utility, that when he was paid off with Rhode Island money, the redeemability rate was less, so that his wealth had actually been stolen through what I would articulate as the differential inflation of two or more systems of fiat or credit money. So I can actually, well, shouldn't go too much further.
Hello, everyone. Learning a lot from this conference. My only question is, I understand that the colonial script was used to fund a lot of the finances in the early America. However, it was my understanding that it had a very high inflation rate because of the amount of money being issued by the state. Is that something that actually occurred? And if so, how will we be able to mitigate that if we try to bring back the greenback?
Well, I've read that the economists who had studied that period were actually quite impressed how stable the prices were. Yeah. Of course, this was prior to the greenback period, right? The greenbacks were issued in 1801 or thereabout. But as far as I know, the prices were very stable during that period. They would, and in fact, they even collected initially. They would collect the money and then destroy it, then reissue it for the next loan. So they're pretty careful and responsible. Steve, you have something to add?
Yeah, if I could, and let me respond to Carl too at the same time. First, the case of Rhode Island, and then the general case of inflation in the colonies. In the first case, the Rhode Island, Massachusetts, New Hampshire, and Connecticut were the Massachusetts Bay colonies. And when they separated and became 4 colonies, they decided at that time that they would share their money systems together. So those 4 independent ones ended up making their own money And but they could use it across borders. Well, Rhode Island figured out if we make extra money, we can use it on the other side and get extra goods coming over here. And that's what they did. They just increased the money supply, and that is inflation. And what happened during the colonies, for all 13 colonies over the 18th century, it was a big learning experience. And all of the colonies learned from that experience about inflation. And let me go and make Joe's general point about inflation not being great. The best example comes from the colony of Pennsylvania. From 1723 to 1776, that 52-year period, from when the crown allowed them, because of such great suffering and the loss of population and needing some money system, the crown allowed them to start a local paper currency. And Pennsylvania did it. It was Philadelphia and the surrounding 6 counties, and including the area of what we call today Delaware, which is the other colonies associated with them then. And they created their paper money system, and they managed it very well. There's a very interesting talk about that, and the balancing between inflation and deflation. Things can go in the opposite direction. And when Joe just mentioned here, when they burned their money back and then reissued it again, it wasn't in the law in 1723 and 24 when they did create paper money. But by 1726 says we have to stop burning it, and we have to be able to keep it in circulation to keep the productivity, because we don't have the coin, and our population is ready to grow again. The main point here, though, is that between 1723 and 1776, Pennsylvania had the least amount of inflation of any of the other colonies, and in any 52-year period in U.S. history since then. Create a 52-year period somewhere in U.S. history, and the colony of Pennsylvania had a better record on inflation. And this was even in spite of the French Indian Wars, when they pumped in a lot of money for that, which was remarkable for them being Quakers and being very peace-oriented. They had a real schism going on, but that was an existential crisis for them. And there's a lot of interesting history there. And in time, we look forward to your questions to learn a lot more about this. It's just really fascinating. Howard, you have your hand raised.
Thanks for all that great detail, Steve. Go ahead, Howard.
I was thinking that the greenbacks were a permanently circulating money. And Henry Carey, who was Lincoln's economic advisor, described the economy when the greenbacks were issued, saying that debt began to disappear from society, that people were paying off their debt because suddenly you had money that wasn't a debt. It was a payment. And so businesses started feeling freer as well because they were getting out from under their debt. So I don't think the inflation was due to the greenbacks. If there was any inflation, it was due to the bankers creating $1.50 for every greenback that was issued. And of course, they know how to make monetary war.
Thanks, Howard.
Any other closing thoughts, Joe?
No, I would say again that for this section was for those new to the topic, curious about what monetary reformers feel we should be doing. And you just heard both Steve and Howard show that you can get into a very interesting history and learn a great deal about America and its monetary history. You can become, you can gain the kind of expertise they have if you pursue the topic.
Well, one of my favorite pieces, Joe's from Canada, and one of my favorite pieces on Canadian monetary history is the playing card money. And And King William the Third of England, the new king, the same king who starts the Bank of England, wanted to take over Quebec. And Joe, do you know that story?
No.
I'm going to say it then because it's such a cute story.
Learning is a lifetime activity.
Yeah. What happened then was that they got 32 ships together. The merchants in Boston supplied it with all the goods because England, the crown was going to buy their goods. So they were in business and the crown was going to be good for what they say. And we had to get the soldiers. So they had the local militia and the farmers and the extra hands, and they got 2,000 of these people. They put them on these 32 ships. They got some commanders and the lead people who were more English, of course, with their abilities. And then they went up around Newfoundland, came down the St. Lawrence Seaway, and was heading towards Quebec to ransack the place. And the booty, or the ransacking, is what they would use to pay off the merchants and the soldiers. And they come around, and what happens is in France, in Quebec, there were three leaders. There was a military leader, a political leader, and a civil justice leader. And all of them could work together and create an emergency response. And they did that. They took playing cards. I have pictures of it. I'm going to get pictures of it in a moment. They took playing cards and snapped them into fours. So if it was say one unit or two of something, three of something, it would be say 3 francs or 3 pence or something. And they would create money out of these playing cards. And each of them signed on each playing card. And then this was used as the money to organize and to pay people to organize to get ready for this English offensive. And when those 32 ships came around and attacked Quebec, they were able to procure from different little forts and different outposts all of the cannons and everything else, and they just let them fire and fire upon, and they knocked down enough ships and hobbled the English fleet that and despite what they tried a few different things, but they ended up going back to Boston empty-handed. And that's when our paper money system begins on this continent, and for good. And it turns into being a fiat money system, but that's another story. But I just wanted to give you the French side of it there. And and that paper card system was a fiat money system, and people and the Canadians liked that money system the French had there, and that became the crucial money system right up until the French Indian War in the mid 18th century. Okay, enough of that.
Well, thanks, Steve. You've just proved again that history is the best way for us to move our cause forward. That's a great story.
Yeah. Okay, Richard, you have a question?
Yeah, thanks. This is sort of still introductory for me, but I see that it's very important for all citizens to have some idea what's going on monetarily. My question is, I know that unemployment plays a big role in determining, when to raise rates or lower rates and stuff like that. Could you just go over the relationship between unemployment and inflation and interest rates?
Richard, you certainly know how to ask the small questions. Joe, do you want to go at that?
I think I'll let you take a crack.
There's, okay, you mentioned inflation. Let me get the three things you said. I went and got that book when I muted my screen, and I want to show you guys the pictures of that French money in the 1690. Actually, in 1690 they created this money to defeat the English. I'll show it to you in a moment. But Richard, you said, okay, the relationship between inflation, and I think you mentioned debt. What was this third item, if you could?
Well,
interest rate.
Unemployment.
Interest rate. Okay, yeah, interest rate, unemployment, jobs, inflation, and okay. I'm going to, since we could deal with any time period, but let's stay with the colonial period because we're enjoying that time for right now. A little bit going on is, let's deal with employment first. In 1721, Mayor Dickinson, who was the mayor of Philadelphia, said, I don't know how we're going to make it through the winter because we don't have everything we need. And we may have, people are going to start leaving the city, going back to England or some other, going up to another city, to New York or wherever, Boston. And so there had to be jobs. And what they were saying was missing was a medium of exchange. They needed money. So finally in 1723, after more suffering, they got the money, and they got 15,000 pounds, and then and it went so quickly in loans, and it was so useful, and they thought it was going to take 6 months, but it only took 3 weeks for people to want that money and borrow that money, and they paid a 5% interest. But the economy was ready to go, and it was just so needed. They were happy to pay that 5% interest. So we'll mention interest. We'll go back and forth and look at how this game is played for a minute, Richard.
Yeah.
So go ahead, Joe.
No, go ahead.
So they created another 20,000 pounds to make it another 30,000 pounds. They doubled it. So now they had a total of 45,000 pounds. They ended up loaning 80% or 37,500 into circulation at 5% interest, which gave them a rough income later. They around 2,000 pounds per year. And the government, and rather than it go to private banks, it went to the public government. It went to the Pennsylvania Assembly. Pennsylvania Assembly had a shelf, and they called that shelf their bank. I don't know if they're creating the word then, but they called it the bank. And that's where they had their paper money that they created. And they passed it off in terms of loans. And what they took in was people's promises to pay back the money plus 5%. Now, how can you do that? And as we'll learn, and we'll talk about this later on, that Richard Robbins will talk about on Sunday, is that the interest isn't created. So how are you going to pay back? So back at that time, you could pay back in silver. But what they end up doing is starting a system that has to more or less keep going, or they have to learn to modify it. And they learn to modify it in healthy ways. And so let's get into that a bit. What happened, though, in those first 2 laws, they said you had to burn the money when you came back, when you paid it back. When they received that 2,000 in interest, they were allowed to spend that back into circulation. And they spent 20% into their circulation. That money comes back, and that's good. Then when the principal is paid back, Richard and others, the money was burnt when it was returned, when it was paid back. And by 1726, instead of inflation, you had the opposite, deflation. You were running out of money and people didn't have it. So everything that was happening in the 17 teens and the very early 1720s was happening again. A crisis was forming. And so they passed a law that says, we're going to stop burning the principal when it's returning. We're going to reloan the money, and we're only going to change the notes as we need to. So they learned to, at that point, to start balancing between inflation and deflation. Deflation is a real killer too. Inflation is less painful. It's more quiet, if you will. In deflation, it really hurts. And we're often in deflation periods. All of the depression is a deflation, but so anyhow, so from 1726, the government didn't have to have debt, and people really didn't have to have debt because the government created money that was easily paid back, and they made sure that they were also spending money into circulation. So the money they spent, it allowed them to have the interest and the principal more easily paid. And when they needed to add money to it, they did. By 1731, they stabilized the money at 80,000. In 1845, they added another 5,000. It was stabilized at 85,000 pounds. And the interest paid for hospitals, a poor people's home. The Quakers have a term for it, but they did a tremendous goods. Benjamin Franklin was able to ride his horse around Pennsylvania, taking care of mail and everything else that he was doing. And he would see people in their farmhouses, and he said, these people understand money, but they also, and they're getting smart and are doing well. And he gave it one word. He said the families are, and the people are contentment. He said that's what describes what's going on. There's contentment. And he happened to notice, he said their education is getting stronger too. So he was proud of the people of Pennsylvania then. And even though he's from Boston, he became a Pennsylvanian, sort of like a Quaker-oriented person, but that's more stories for later.
Richard, I would add that Keynes used the metaphor of a theater and tickets. And he said, if you don't print up enough tickets, you can't use the full capacity of the theater. And this is what they were finding. They had the land, they had the labor, they had the physical capital, but they didn't have enough tickets to fully utilize that capacity. Tickets, of course, being the money. You have to issue enough money so that everybody can participate, be mobilized to use that capacity. And that was the secret that was covered then. That's what happened in World War II. Doris Goodwin's article. We've learned that lesson over and over, and we've forgotten it over and over.
Yeah, that's very important. We're going to switch to Nick in a moment, but let's give John Howell the last word. He has his hand up.
Yeah, let me turn on my video here. This history is really neat and really helpful, but there's a simpler answer to Richard Ronner's question in terms of the relationship between interest rates, inflation, and unemployment. Because what the interest rates do, the change in interest rates are designed to change the money supply. In other words, the reason why the interest rates are declined, are reduced, is to encourage bank lending, and that increases the money supply. But if there's too much money out there, it causes inflation. Now, historically, from Del Mar's point of view, whenever the money supply goes up, you get inflation, but you get full employment too. So increasing the money supply stimulates the economy into providing employment, and it increases prices. So when you get more money in the system, you always get inflation and better employment, less unemployment. So those two tend to go hand in hand. So the whole purpose of adjusting the interest rates is to try to adjust the money supply by influencing the rate of bank lending, because it's bank lending that produces the money that alters the money supply.
Thanks, John. That conversation gets more nuanced as we go along, but very good. How about if we turn it over to Nick right now? And well, let me just introduce Joe again. Is an educational scholar. I'll put it like that in my thinking. Joe has been a high school teacher. He's taught a bit of everything in terms of economics and civics and history and wonderful stuff in Canada there, and has worked with students for a long, long time and retired. And in his retirement, he's concerned about all of his students and everyone in a better world. And so he's a right-hand person to this whole monetary movement. And thank you, Joe. And Nick comes at this from a little different perspective, I'm going to say a peace-oriented one that he learned, an anti-Vietnam War one, and is also very concerned about the social welfare and social justice. And he might share, how did he get involved? And how did you get involved, Nick? And because we want to get these people involved, how did you get involved? Do you have anything to say about that?
Yeah. Thanks, Steve. I want to thank Joe for a wonderful presentation too. I learned a lot. You know, we all keep learning in this. And I got involved. I think it's important that how everybody got involved here that's listening, and maybe to think about motivating factors, why we want to change our money system, or why you're interested in taking a look at what we call monetary reform. And I'm a Vietnam vet, and I became an anti-war activist, not during Vietnam, not after Vietnam, but basically when we went to war in Iraq and Afghanistan. And that got me started studying and reading a lot. And I also became an advocate against the war at home on the poor people. And so as that's going along, my wife we've been married for 46 years. How she's put up with me, I have no idea, or whatever it is. But you got to be for something. You can't be against this, and you got to be for something. Because we stood out on a street corner for 14 and a half years, every Saturday at noon in Northwest Indiana, protesting the wars, advocating for social justice as we moved along. And as I'm moving along, all of a sudden I read somewhere, I don't even remember where I read it, it's crazy, that the banks create our money. How is this possible? Banks create our money. I thought when I got a loan, we had a family business earlier, and we were searching for loans or whatever for our family business. I have a house, we bought a mortgage, and I thought that there was just, banks had money that was set aside for this, from their profits, from people that invested in it, and that's what they loaned to us. And then I read somewhere that banks create our money when they make a loan. No, this can't be true. It absolutely, there's no way that this can be true. I just couldn't understand it. And I found Ellen Brown's book, Web of Debt. That was the first book I read, and this is probably right around 2008 or 9 or 10 or something or other like that. Anyway, that was the first book I read, and she laid this out anybody read that book? It's very entertaining, using the example of the Wizard of Oz, and of how our money system is created, and nobody knows what's going on behind that curtain where they're creating the money, where the wizard is, until the little dog runs under the curtain. And so anyway, when I did find out that, really banks create this just seemed like such a tremendous injustice. This is I believe, the most necessary thing in society is money. Food, shelter, clothing, clean air, clean water. Yeah, but we don't get that unless we've got money. And so as the most necessary thing, it is up to us as citizens to understand how that's created And if we don't like the way it's created, to change it, to make it so it's created so it works for us. It's kind of as simple as that. Can we have a screen share here, or do we have that, or I don't
You
even know
have
how
that,
all this
Nick.
works. So, can you see my screen or not?
You
What do
got
I
to
do?
share it first. Let me just spotlight this. I want to finish this. Here is the book I was sharing from about. This has wonderful colonial history, and it also includes a Canadian story. It's called Monetary Experiments, and I don't see the name here. Richard Lester. Here it is, up here. Richard Lester. And here's a picture of those playing cards I told you about. So there were numbers, and all three of them, those leaders, the justice, the political, the economic leaders, signed those cards, and those cards were good, and they were redeemed when the French brought back the money in their ships, but they ended up just using the playing card system in much, not only in Canada, all the way down to New Orleans in terms of the whole trading and the furrier trade and all of that. So let's remove. Oh, okay. Now Nick is ready. You going to share your screen, Nick?
Yeah.
Thank you. Sorry. Thank you for that interjection.
Can you see it? Okay, so this is kind of a little bit about what we've just been talking about how important money is. And basically, most of us, maybe not us because we've delved into this a little bit, but most people think that our government creates our money. Banks loan us money that has been created by our government, and the Federal Reserve System is owned and operated by our government. That's the way we think it should work. And we intuitively believe that's our system. None of it's true, though. And with monetary reform, our government would create all of our money. Banks would only own money that has already been created by our government. The Federal Reserve System would be slimmed down and become a part of our government in the U.S. Treasury Department. That's what the monetary reform that basically the American Monetary Institute has championed under Stephen Zarlenga. Just a quick word about Stephen Zarlenga. He was the one that started the American Monetary Institute along with Stephen Walsh and several other people. And he was economics. He wasn't an economics professor or PhD, but he was involved in economics and gold. I think he sold, what was it, gold, whatever it is, gold futures or something or other. He was big on that. And then he started to wonder about the monetary system, and it didn't seem to kind of make sense with him, you know, the way things worked as far as our money. And he did this deep dive into monetary history, and he ended up, I do have a copy of him here somewhere. He ended up, can we do the book here, or I'm holding it?
You can do it, except that if you want, then I could spotlight you, but you'd have to stop sharing your screen. But people can see it if they'll see your image. It says The Law Science of Money there.
Yeah, okay. Well, that's his book that he wrote, and I'm trying to think of, it come out in 2002 or 3 or 4 or sometime or other around then, but it took him a long time to write the book. He did this deep dive into monetary history, wasn't doing anything else other than researching and writing that. And when I first heard about this money thing, there was a monetary conference in Chicago. I just saw it in the newspaper. And so I called up. And anyway, I ended up talking to Stephen Zarlenga. And, you know, he invited me to the monetary conference, which is what we're doing right now. And it's going to be what number, Stephen?
20th. This is
okay. This will be the 20th conference. And so I think this was in maybe 2009 or 2010. And he invited me. anyway, it didn't work out as far as me going. And I thought, I don't belong there. I'm not, I took one course in economics, Econ 101 in college. And this is for PhDs in economics. And what the heck would I be doing in a monetary reform conference, you know? So anyway, things went along. The Occupy movement came out. And anyway, Steve and I became friends. We were involved with Occupy and spreading the word on monetary reform. But I hadn't been to a conference. And finally, he said to me after a couple of years, he said, how come you've never been to a conference? I said, well, that's for the PhDs. No, he said, that's for everybody. So he invited me to a conference and I went, and I think maybe that was 2011 or 12. And I went to my first conference and I was just blown away because it was not for just PhDs, although there were some PhDs there. And of course, many of the presentations are given by PhDs, and it's very important to hear from them or whatever. But it's for just regular people. That's what monetary reform is for. Regular people taking a look at how the most important thing in our country, that in our lives, the one thing we need just to exist is created. And if we don't like the way it's created, to work to changing it. And the way that we can work to change that is we have to help educate the population so that they understand what we understand about our money. And the way the system has evolved and is built up is that the money power, the people that own the power to create our money, which would be the banks and the owners and the owners of the banks, they don't want us to understand this. They don't want us to understand this at all. I've written 3 books on this. I'm going to scale down here and see if I can find where they are here. I call it the People, Planet, and Power of Money Project. Money Creation 101, Change Our Money, Change Our World, came out on Amazon in 2023. This is kind of the nuts and bolts of how our money is created by banks when they make loans to us. It only exists while the loan is in effect or whatever it is. And the second book is History of Money 101, which came out earlier this year. And this is a dive into the history. And the last one, this is my real baby here. This is Spaceship Earth 101, which will be out. It's with a it's going through some editing. I'm done writing, but it's going through editing, and hopefully it'll be out in December. Briefly, the first book, Money Creation 101, explains in everyday language how our money is presently created by private banks. It takes to task the economics establishment for withholding this information from us, because they have. And we there's plenty of information in the book, but I had a little back and forth with a Federal Reserve macro economist, and he was unwilling to tell me how the money's created. Now, he knows how it's created. I know that. And he told me it was real important what I was asking about, but he didn't feel like he could step outside the box and tell me, and he forwarded it to the Federal Reserve Public Relations Department. And I followed up with them, and I sent out inquiries to well over 100. I did it on a couple of different mailings. Federal Reserve economist, and he was the one that did respond. So anyway, the Federal Reserve was unable to tell us how they, and they're still unable to tell us. They told us that they have told us in the past that it was created via fractional reserve lending, which means that the banks would loan out multiples of the money they hold in reserve to us and create money that way. There are 3 theories of bank created money. One is the intermediation of funds, which is kind of the Federal Reserve's statement now, I think, on how which means that really nobody creates the money. And the banks are just loaning money that's been put into them by somebody else, which doesn't make any sense. Somebody has to create the money. The second one would be the fractional reserve theory, And the third one is the credit creation theory, which is that the banks create money when they make loans. They create money out of thin air. And right down here, we've got a little bit on this, I think. And anyways, there's some caveats to that. Maybe that's back up here. Caveats to this. Whatever. Get started on one subject here, and caveats. You know, maybe the caveats got lost. But the two caveats about them creating the money out of thin air are that all of the banks have to do it together. They all have to be in it together. They're all in the Federal Reserve System. They're all doing it together. And the second one is that the Federal Reserve moves the money around, reserve money around, after the loans have been made to justify what has already happened on the bank end. Those caveats are in place, so anybody could say strongly that the banks create money out of thin air. Let's go back to where we were here with the books here. So we talked to the Federal Reserve guy. We talked to a couple of I did on emails with a couple of university economists. I sent out to top 10 universities ranked economics programs to I don't know, it was over 100 of them professors, and a couple of them did answer my questionnaire. And basically, they were both unable to definitively tell me how our money is created. And that's kind of unacceptable, I think. And our present bank-created debt money system is led and enabled by the Federal Reserve System. This is a little bit from history of money. It's a result of the work of the National Monetary Commission. This is before the Fed was created in 1913, and this was led by Senator Nelson Aldrich. Monetary historian Alexander Del Mar reported that the National Monetary Commission published 24 volumes of research and work without defining the nature of money. So they were, that's how our money system was created, 24 volumes of research and work, and they didn't even define what money was. These two economists here, Studinsky and Cruz, Financial History of the U.S., talking about the National Reserve Association. That was the first name for the Federal Reserve, the first time it was presented to Congress. It didn't go through, then they changed the name, and they went from trying to get the Republicans to put it through to the Democrats to put it through, and it was the Democrats that put it through. Anyway, what they said was that control was to be exercised completely by private bankers. This is within the Federal Reserve System. I do manage to define money several times in the three books that I wrote. And the final one, this is kind of like right at the end of Spaceship Earth, which is not out yet, but money is an exclusive, abstract, legal power of the state, which acts as a measure of value and a final means of payment, facilitating commerce, enabling all our people to have meaningful lives, and being there for society to confront the momentous crises of today and those which will inevitably arise in the future. Well, that's what money should be, according to its nature. Our money system is not that right now, but that's what we have to make it. One of the things is this money power 7 tactics to stay in power that I just came up with. And it's kind of, when I wrote this, it probably took me like 10 minutes to write it. And it's in all three books. But let's just go over these 7 tactics. It just kind of came right off my mind so quick. But the first line of defense used to ensure the continuation of a toxic money system is to keep the people confused and in the dark about the present system of bank-created debt money and the democratic alternative, publicly created money. Second line of defense is to tell us we're too stupid to understand it. Third line of defense is to create textbooks that lie to us about how our money is created. The fourth line of defense is to stop teaching monetary history, even in the most prestigious economic programs. The fifth line of defense is to simply ignore papers critical of the debt money system or supportive of publicly created money. The sixth line of defense is to control economics journals so that they will not publish papers critical of the debt money system or supportive of publicly created money. The seventh line of defense is to make it clear to up-and-coming young economists that for them to buck the bank-created debt money system is career suicide. And that's our system. So they've kept the people, they've been successful in keeping us confused in the dark, where we don't know how our money is created. When I took my Economics 101 course, we came to the chapter, it was near the end of the book, and the chapter on the Federal Reserve System. And our instructor, we're taking Econ 101, he says, we're going to skip the chapter on the Federal Reserve. He said, only a handful of people in the entire country are capable of understanding how the Federal Reserve System works to create our money. So at the time, that was just before I went to Vietnam, and I was happy to walk out of the classroom and not know how our money was created. That's on me. But that is, and that's what that's what they do. We're not smart enough to understand it, but we are smart enough to understand. They've just made it so confusing that we don't understand it, and they don't tell us. And then they do this in their textbooks. Stephen was reading from a textbook the other day when we got together. What's his name?
Michigan.
Yeah, Michigan. I got that book too. He doesn't tell us how our money's created. He
I'll share.
He doesn't tell us how our money's created. They don't tell us. They don't tell us. The fourth line of defense: stop teaching monetary history. Okay, I went through the top 3 programs. Ranked by, I believe, the U.S. News and World Report. Harvard, Stanford, and MIT. I did it when I started writing the books. It was 4 or 5 years ago, and I've done it, updating it a few years ago after we came out of the COVID or whatever it was. All of the different programs that they have, courses they have in their economics program, totaling for the 3 schools, I believe it was 400 and some courses that they offer. None of them are about the have history of money in the title. None of them have monetary history in the title. And I know that they have like economics history. Well, that's different than history of money. And that they do teach some history. They must teach some history of money in there, but it would certainly behoove them. And when I sent my book out to what are called beta readers, where they read it and give you feedback and tell you everything you got to change. And believe me, it's a humbling experience to do that. But one of them said, well, here I went to Rutgers University, their website, and Rutgers has a course on history of money. And I said, hallelujah. And I did give credit for that in my book. But basically, most of the schools don't teach it at all, including the best schools. Ignore papers critical of the debt money system or supportive of publicly created money. Well, the Federal Reserve has never reviewed The Lost Science of Money that Stephen Zarlega wrote. They've never reviewed Professor Kiro Yamaguchi from Japan. He went to University of California, and he put these the current money system and a publicly created money system into his computer plans, and came up with results for publicly created money that it would, number one, pay off the federal debt, pay it off. That's impossible in our present system. It would vastly reduce private debt. It would stop the business cycle fluctuations of up and down, up and down, up and down. and just make life better for all of us. There's a fourth one, I can't remember exactly what it is. But and there are other papers too that are supportive of publicly created money. None of them reviewed over 400 macro economists at the different Federal Reserve banks. They probably got over 1,000 total economists, and none of them can write a paper saying, hey, Nick is wrong here. Steven Zarlingo is wrong here. Yamaguchi's wrong. Here's why he's wrong. No, they ignore it. And there's a name for that. It's called shunning. That's what the economics establishment, because it is dominated by the Federal Reserve for over 100 years now, is done. They've shunned any other look at money because the Federal Reserve, this is all in the books here, guys. The Federal Reserve's job is not to give us the best money. The Federal Reserve's job is to prop up the present system we have. So that's why we have to educate the public. And the Federal Reserve economists control the economics journals. They're on the editorial staffs of them. And they're not going to publish articles, especially in the top journals, that are critical of this. And for any young, up-and-coming young economist, economics student, which graduates, and I put in the book, I can't remember exactly what the estimate was, but if they're going to get a PhD in economics, it's going to be over 100, 200 grand. They're going to be in debt unless they've been able to finance their education somewhere else. And now they're going to go out and try to get a job
finally,
and support us. So anyway, that's how we back that stuff up. Real quick, just to go through the three books. History of Money. It takes us to civilization's birthplace, which is going to be talked up by Dr. Michael. Michael Hudson. And this is different than what Adam Smith said in Wealth of Nations. Adam Smith is the Bible that our present system uses to justify our economics and monetary system. But instead of what Adam Smith said was it was used in barter economies, butchers, bakers, blacksmiths, trading back and forth, and then they started to use something else to trade back and forth, and they called it money. And number one, there were no ancient barter economies. None. David Graeber in his book got the first 5,000 years. He didn't even know about monetary reform when he wrote this, but he said that there were none. Unfortunately, he died a few years ago. And instead of that, the Fertile Crescent societies, these were kind of temple societies, pharaohs and kings in charge, and they created money as seeds and livestock. And this money could be loaned out because the seeds, you planted them and you grew and you had more seeds, you could pay that back plus interest. And the same thing with your cow or your goat you got or whatever it is. It could have a baby and you could pay the loan back plus interest, and people prospered. And then they fell into the fallacy of using metallic coins for money. And the metallic coins couldn't grow. And that's when they started the debt forgivenesses. Hudson's going to get into all of that. But then we go on to ancient Greece and Rome for the first systems of metallic publicly created money, which were not gold and silver of the other ones. Am I running out of time, Steve? Or
Yeah, you're a few minutes over. Nick, you have a good, you're well greased, Nick, but
I got carried away.
I'll come back to that. I'll bring up Hudson in my part a little bit. I'll finish off Hudson for you.
Okay, here, let me just throw this one thing out, because this is, when we're talking about the colonial script that was created, the bills of credit in colonial times, because our colonies wouldn't have survived without this. I just happened to see this. But The Colonial Currency Project at Notre Dame University calls this was 1690 in Massachusetts, the first publicly, the bills of credit that they did. Anyway, the University of Notre Dame, I'm a Notre Dame fan, and what is it? The Colonial Currency Project, the first public paper money issued in the history of Western civilization. That's what we were talking about that Joe was talking about, and I'll leave it there.
Thanks, Nick. It's good to get different people and different ideas. Let's hold on questions a little bit, and what's in the schedule right now is a 10-minute break. I want to honor that. People may want to use the restroom or grab coffee, etc., etc. And so it is, let's give it's 38 past the hour. Let's take until 11 or until 50 past the hour. So we'll reconvene in 12 minutes. And then I'm going to start the junior year presentation for detectives of this at this monetary university. And I'm going to talk about other detectives and how the past work is and how far they got. So we'll see how that goes. So anyhow, see you all detectives, sought after detectives in 12 minutes. Thank you. You're a sought after detective, and it turns out now in this university, there's been other detectives trying to figure out what is the mystery going on, what's missing, what's wrong with the system. And so now we're going to find out what are some of the top present day detectives at this university, what have they found out? And I'm going to share a little bit about what's going to come and what they're going to talk about, so you're familiar a little bit with these people. And also I'm going to introduce AFJM, because we'll do that too, and you'll see what those initials stand for in a moment. So I'm going to share my screen, and I'm going to go over here. And can everyone see the conference schedule for today here? Are we good?
Yes.
Okay, great. Thank you. And we're moving right along, right here, junior year, Nick, right here. Howard. And you'll be here senior years in 1220. So you'll be coming on again soon there. And then we'll have a closing Q&A, and then we can go over 1 o'clock a little bit. And I had possible showing of Fantopia. I'm thinking we might it'll be a long session already, and we'll save Fantopia for another day. But anyhow, that's another story. So in our junior year, we're going to learn about these other detectives. I'll give a little gossip of who they are, what's going on, and so you can recognize them, and going along the hallways or whatever of the university here. And so anyhow, let's get started with that. And I'm going to jump back and forth in this schedule so we can look at people and names. But right among us is John Howell. Just for 1 second, I'm going to spotlight John. Oh, I can't. I'm sorry. I'd have to stop sharing my screen, John. But John Howell, and let me explain this. Let me explain 2 things here. John Howell on Thursday night, this is very oriented towards getting the system right, as Howard was just talking about it, getting it right nationally. And we're going to have 2 presentations on the U.S. national system and legislation to change it. And the first presentation grows straight out of Stephen Zarlenga's work. And from 2005, right away at 2005 to 2010, he worked on the American Monetary Act, which was a reform bill. And that became there was a bill introduced into Congress by Dennis Kucinich, and it was called the Need Act. And the Need Act worked, and we learned about it, and it was something very definite. It was legal, and it could be put into law to change the system. So it was a real milestone to get that done. So we've used that Need Act to think and revise it as the times have changed. And now we have, in is our language called the American Monetary Act. The Need Act was the National Emergency Employment Defense Act, NEED, and Kucinich gave it that title for political reasons for selling it. But we, John and company, have gone back to AMRA, and that's the American Monetary Act, but they've put in the word letter R, American Monetary Reform Act of 2024. And that implies that this changes just about every year or every other year as people meditate, new things happen, and how do we want to incorporate it? So I'll talk a little bit more about that. So that's John Howell. And then the Need Act and AMRA and AMA, the American Monetary, that all comes the antecedent for that is in the 1930s by the Dean of American Economists at the time in the 1930s, Irving Fisher, and his 1939 work on it. Now, there was earlier work by Henry Simons and Fisher, a little earlier, as early as 1933, where they formulated this thinking in this act. And Richard DeMar is not going to look at this one so much as what came out, which is very strong and powerful, but he wants to take back a little earlier act. He says some other interesting things were happening in the 30s, and he's going to bring this up, and he calls this act the Greenback Restoration Act. And actually, in the 1930s, there were still two little movements going on where people were still greenback oriented, and Franklin Roosevelt, I think, was a big concern because he didn't want them to be more left than he, and so he was trying to get compromises. But anyhow, that's another conversation. So Richard DeMar and John Howell, and both of these gentlemen are very, very much a part of the central theme of the Alliance for Just Money. And I'm just going to state who they are, and this is a very important organization. As you can see with AMI right now, I've stated we're like a learning organization. We're working more internationally. We have a flow of conversation and listening to ideas, like Neva's brought up this idea of an international currency. Who else has been thinking of this? Jill has brought up the questions earlier about different local currencies, and we've discussed local currencies in different countries, in Israel, in Kenya last year. So there's a lot of different things going on. So AMA is just a big sponge trying to absorb everything going on. But the American Alliance, or the Alliance for Just Money, rather, is a little bit more campaign oriented, a little bit more focused than US. There's still a large overlap between AMI and AFJM, and it's a real healthy thing, and we just work together, but it gives us two little bit of different focuses. So this whole Thursday night is going to be an Alliance for Just Money. This is the heart and soul of the Alliance and what they think about, and they have really great thinkers and very refined conversations in this area. I think Mike Howell will be moderator for it, who's on the one of the committees at AMRA and active in both groups. And so anyhow, number of beautiful things going on there. And it is a wonderful thing for people here. Look at yourself and think of how you want to get involved. Are you more of a talker and campaign, and you're more just what's going on in the US and how I can relate and connecting, AFJM is a wonderful place to get started. There's a one-time membership fee for the rest of your life. It's $20. You can't afford it, just tell them, they'll give it to you for free. But it's just a little something they would like to get if possible. There's other people in the group that if someone can't afford it, fine. And then if you want to become a voting member, you pay $25 a year, and it's a way for the organization to have some money. They haven't received government or big corporate money, so it's a way to get some money so they can begin their work and do their work. And they have generous individuals giving, and we're very lucky for that. So, okay, here we go. So that's Thursday night. And so consider the Alliance for Just Money. And our website is, the AMI is monetary.org, as you know. And the Alliance for Just Money is, you just add Monetary Alliance. So just you add their one word alliance. So monetaryalliance.org is the website, and very important. So Friday. Oh yeah, I'm going to give a little back on Thursday for a second. I'll give a little AMI report, and we'll hear more about AFJM in this report, and we'll probably have maybe Tabitha or Lucille or John or anybody, anybody at AFJM could do this. So we'll see what goes on here. This is to be figured out. But I'll give a little report of AMI too. So this will be maybe 15 minutes AMI or 5 minutes of AFJM, something like that. Maybe 10 minutes, 10, 15, whatever. It'll be what it is. We'll figure. Friday, and Carl, for example, in this group has brought up a number of times Michael Hudson. And Michael Hudson is a prolific writer. He writes about the present. He writes about the past. In this time, last year in part 1 of Temples of Enterprise, and his book hadn't come out, but we began a discussion, and we talked about all of the big ideas without really getting into the history. We spent 90 minutes of this, and it's a whole very special session. Well, this year, the Temples of Enterprise finally came out in June, to my knowledge, or May, end of May or something. And I've read the book, and I've said questions. So this is going to be an interview with Michael Hudson, and I'll be giving him questions, and we're going to cover that history. And just for you to meditate on this, there's going to be a period in history out of the Bible that you know as the Garden of Eden. And I think what we're going to learn from Michael and beyond this is that there was a period for 1,300 years, 3,500 BC to 2,200 BC, where the administrators were very conscious of all of the workers and finding a place for everyone to help society and work together. And they also discovered there were little wars and skirmishes. They figured out war wasn't good, trading was better. So they figured out good ways. So there's going to be some very interesting things, and part of it's going to be a caring economy, and it's going to be caring to the extent that caring has to come over greed, and it's got to take the place of avarice. And he's going to go into some Roman historians that say it beautifully, but I won't do that right now. So come Friday, and this will be a beautiful conversation. And in this sense, there'll be those leaders, and came in the Bible around debt forgiveness. And there wasn't a sense of property. Yes, a sense of land tenure, but not the sense of property. So what are these things, and how can they help us go into the future in a better way? Some very interesting things here from our deep history that can help us today, I believe. Then we have Zaid Aziz. I just got his book yesterday. I can't, it's on my little sub screen here, but it's Confessions of an Islamic Banker. And this book is, I'm just reading it and it's fascinating. He's talking about what's going on around the world, but also in Islamic thinking. And he's going to have a lot of Islamic terms. And so there's a lot here to think about from an Islamic perspective. So Zaid is from Malaysia. Malaysia has actually a connection to monetary reform through an interesting author that's a friend of ours, and it's called Fantopia, and it's by James Gibbs Stewart, a Scottish banker, and he's also written The Money Bomb. He's also written Hidden Menace and Hidden Menace to World Peace. And he's also written Economics for a Green Renaissance. So these are, and he was an advisor and he gave Malaysia good advice. And I don't know, I think it was part of the reasons that colonial ends there a little bit better than, say, it did in the Philippines or in Indonesia. It's an interesting bit of history there. But so, and the title, this title just got modified a day ago, by a monetary reformer to monetary reformers of public banking and sovereign money and getting it done. You know, he's got some definite feelings. And Zaid, as Nevis and others talked about, they're part of an international group. The AMI was at the founding of the International Movement for Monetary Reform. So was AFJM about 6-7 years ago. And they have the same goals. And we now have over 30 countries that have participated in IMMR, and Zaid's a part of this. So Zaid is very Islamic and very Western at the same time, and he's just got a good, caring heart. So this will be a very interesting talk from another perspective, but a very good talk. So that's our Friday night. And this too, the history of behind Zaid obviously comes out of the biblical tradition and the Quran too. So that'll be a very interesting night. So these are two great, if we can use the term just for our analogy today, two super detectives, and they're passing on their information, their best info going forward for you to have. Saturday speakers. We have a little warm up in the morning, little introduction, a nice song. I think Howard might be part of that. And then we get straight into it at 9 o'clock with capitalism and the market economy, bringing back together what banking pulls apart. And that's this book here, Capitalism. And this is Jonathan McMillan. There's been a big reading group around this book this summer, and they've spoken before. And this Saturday, we're going to have the banker, and we'll kick it up a notch, and we'll continue with the questions and the ideas. And a lot of our questions today will be I'm going to see if I can get back to them. Like Carl talked about being a Hudson and debt forgiveness and where does the future go. This McMillan has ideas, and also we're connecting McMillan's ideas and another person's ideas, Sole Omarova, and thinking about putting those two together and what could come. And one of the people doing that is the next speaker, and this is strategically placed here, Samuel Cosm was one of the leaders from the Swedish monetary reform group who interviewed Jonathan Macmillan on September 11th. And he's going to talk a little bit about what his sense is from those readings and having a good conversation with Jonathan Macmillan. And there was some questions unanswered. We are working with that list. We have those questions, and we're going to see if we can carry this conversation a little further than where it got in the reading circle. But then Samuel's going to speak about his own ideas of the central bank, the governance, means, and ends of the ideal central bank. So this will be a wonderful follow-up. And so this is the nut and bolts of a banking system, of how a monetary system is thought about and designed. And after Samuel, we have another Samuel, but I think I should have just had Sam here. I don't know why I got to Samuel, but I think that could be the official name too. But Hummel and Sam has even recently, this Sam Hummel has worked last year, presented on how do you model, and was going into the details of how does a real system work, a banking system work. And his idea in graduate school and in his studies is to really understand it. And understanding it, as we just learned from Howard and others during the questioning, is we don't know. And what Nick was saying too, we don't know. We've got to find out again. And the next time a crisis comes, we have to have our ideas on the table. We have to know what we're talking about and said, no, enough for supporting the bankers. We're going to take care of Main Street and all of the side streets. And this is how we can do it. And we don't have to bail out the rich. And basically, we may be bailing out a lot of different things, but it comes at a huge price down the line in terms of putting a huge amount of money into the economy for the bankers to save themselves. And then the economy somehow has to absorb that money. And then the banking system, which gets an inordinate amount of that money, it has to flow through the system. And it can be the reasons why we've had these causes inflation, but these high interest rates we've just had recently. And then the central bank is working to reduce the money supply and making it harder. And when it reduces is that the rich people can invest and get high interest rates when the interest rates go up. But most Americans can't even invest pennies to keep up with inflation. So it's very easy for the rich because they're living off of money. And when there's a high interest rate, we've just made it easier for them, including the banks. So Samuel, again, will continue with modeling how this present system works. And then it's to give us more knowledge so we know how to change the system. And Jonathan Macmillan is actually a pseudonym for a banker. Some of the greatest monetary reform friends are the bankers and economists themselves. We just had a march at the Chicago Fed, and a banker came out and who understood what was going on. And what he told us was, we need to have you guys out here every day. There needs to be another group marching against our monetary system every day. And we tried to talk to him, but he couldn't even give us his name. He wasn't even sure if he should even talk to us at all, because you'd have to be fearful. This Jonathan Macmillan is a pseudonym for two people who are very much intertwined with the banking system. And the person who will speak to us has been a lead banker in New York, London, Zurich, and is on top of very deeply into the financial system. And so this will be an important conversation with a top person in the world on where we can go. But it also tells us the top people in the world, back on my picture now, is you see a rope that's split apart and it's just holding on by one string. And it's not that Jonathan Macmillan is against bankers. He says he's against the design. We've got to change the design. When he changes the design, he gets very, very close to the Need Act. And so we're thinking about his thinking with another person. But that's maybe in senior year classes. But we can get to that. It may be in questions after the conference and debriefing that'll come after the conference for you who can stay with it. You'll have a lot of great knowledge, and you'll have a sense of where we can go in the future too. Then we take a break for lunch, and on Saturday we close off with two wonderful presentations. The first one is called The Capital Order, How Economists Invented Austerity and Paved the Way to Fascism. This is after World War I. It happened in Italy and how Mussolini came about. And then also Claire looks at very closely what happened in England at the same time. And she has a whole lot of documentation. And she's looking at three things: how money creation works with the financial system of how money gets used in the economy, and how the industrial work gets done. And those are the three legs for an economy to sit on, a modern day economy to sit on. And she's going to talk about how this works together to create austerity, which is more towards deflation, but it's just the economists running society. And when she comes up closer to the present, she'll talk about what happened in Chile or what's happening to the present day in the United States. So this will be an important conversation, and it gives us a broader look of what's relevant in today's world. Likewise, Steve Maher and Scott Aquano will do the same thing. It's a little more from a socialist Marxist perspective, but their economic thinking is first rate. And it's called The Fall and Rise, not the rise and fall, which you might think, but it's the fall and rise of American finance. And what they're going to look at today in the rise of American finance is where we are today with BlackRock and the Fed working together in the CARES Act. And so we'll get a very up-to-date current look at what's going on in the United States here. And and this is going to give us a new dynamic for how to think of the future too, a very important dynamic. Okay, moving on, let's get to Sunday. In the audience, right? Oh, I gave Howard special breaks, but I didn't give it to Hobart. But Howard's a speaker today. Hobart's not a speaker today, so he doesn't get a special break. Hobart is going to talk about the future of civilization and money. That's how I'm going to describe it, and Krishnamurti. But this is how Hobart's thinking on monetary reform relative to civilization and going into the future. You heard just little tidbits of that in terms of Nevis talking about, should we have an international currency, not have an international currency? So this will be some thinking that'll be dreaming about the future. I'm going to that's my terms. Next, we have on Sunday, Richard Robbins. He's an anthropologist. He's written a book called The Anthropology of Money. He's written some books and papers with Tim DeMuzio and other friends in that group. And his concern is, and he wrote a paper around 2014, Sovereign Money and the Tyranny of the Rate of Return, that I have here. And I know he's updated that, and and it's just looking at the present system and again seeing the suffering. So this suffering goes with that. But when we suffer, though, we can also learn how we need to change things and what we have to be aware of. So Robbins will give a very wonderful talk. Hobart will moderate it. It'll be a very, very good thing. And onwards from there, and similar to that, is from privatized money capital to public planetary capital. Again, Nevis might be interested in this. This is something new. I haven't. Bruce has just worked on this quietly. And question of monetary reform strategy in 3 acts. Bruce said he only needed 60 minutes. I gave him 10 extra minutes. I know he'll use those 10 minutes, I promise, knowing him. And in what Bruce is very at the basis of what Bruce is all about here is the caring economy. He cares for people. And it's an outgrowth too of Bruce Rogers Vaughan's presentation 2 years ago about where are such an individualistic oriented, brand oriented society and where we're not taking care of ourselves as a whole enough. And Bruce is going to be very interested in thinking about a caring society. So all three of these, Hovert, Richard in his way, and Bruce, are all going to be thinking about, they're going to be orienting themselves towards a caring society. Then going back into a little bit of history and concerns, we have Joe Polito, who's with us now, who's given us a wonderful talk as in our first year at the university today. But that's the Canadian Banking System History and Monetary Reform. And basically, I'm going to say it like this: the bankers internationally told Canada in the early 1970s, either you do it our way, either you're going to be on the train or under the train. And they had to change their very wonderful system of money and reform, and very good towards concern of both for the business, for the bankers, but also very much for the government. And government shouldn't be in so much debt. So we're going to get a good history of this in the 20th century. And it's going to be more nuts and bolts about how the system exists and how it can change. And we'll finish off Sunday and the conference too. And Jill has asked about this in our group today: history of complementary currencies in the United States. And she's going to start back with colonial times and walk it all the way up to the present. Howard here has done that, has talked about the history of it more internationally, and we've had some specific examples of complementary currencies. So that tradition will continue this year, and Gwendolyn will hold the staff for that tradition this year. And at the end of it, we'll have a song and a wrap up. And Gwen is a singer, and she'll have songs, and Howard will be on stage. And I promise not to sing with them because I'll be off key. I'm joking. I'm not joking, but we'll have a good time. We'll probably have so we can do it. We'll try it maybe muted and unmuted for a moment and see what that sounds like. But we'll have a good time, and hopefully everybody can get a beer out of the refrigerator or some fun drink for them. And then we'll get to the end, but it'll be a sort of extended here so people can just talk and debrief, because we'll have gone through a huge amount by then. And then about every month going after that, we'll have a debrief. What happened? What went on? What was important for you at this conference? What worked? What didn't work? And then we'll take those ideas and we'll start thinking about the next year with them too. So that's the presentation for now. And how did I do with my time? I went over, but Howard went over too. So Howard, you're on. So thank you, Howard. And I'm going to stop sharing my screen here. Let's just ask for any quick, oh, I got to remove my spotlight. How about one question from a new person? Does any new person have one question? If not, but anyhow, I just gave a huge overview very quickly of what this conference is going to be like. One question from a new person. I'll ask 3 times and then I'm getting to be Howard. So it'll be like an auctioneer. Going once, a question, going twice, going 3 times.
Yeah, can I get
Jamal,
can I get a copy of the Greenback Restoration Act that was talked about in your lecture?
Yes, and I think I'll be surprised if it's not on the website already, but we can work to get it on the website. So there should be some Greenback material there, and if not, I'm making a note to try to get it there and talk to Rich about that. I'm just going to make a note, Greenback, but carry it away then, and we'll work on that. You know what? Let me share my screen, and I'll show you, Jamal, where you would look for that. As we finish the schedule, and right away we have Bruce, he's going to talk. This is his essays and his ideas that he's going to go over. Here's a Zed and more of the bibliography of what's going on. And I don't see Demir. So right in here, we'll try to get the Richard's thinking or writing in here if he can. If he can't, we have to just add it after the conference, Jamal. So that's the best answer. I don't. So if you go here, this is where to look on that, where we put their material for all of these Hovert, Bruce, Robbins, Polito, McMillan, Jonathan, McMillan again, Matei, Maher, so etc. Their resources are here, and here's their pictures, and so all of these are wonderful people here. So that'll be the conference, and it was a lot of work forming it. It has a lot of purpose to it, and we hope you have a great time there. And please invite people. This production, I'm going to work on it later today. Give me 24 hours. I'll have this whole thing up. You can have it in audio, you can have the chat, and you can have the video of it. So if you're walking around, you can hear the audio again. If you want to go over, what did I hear there? You'll be able to find it pretty quick. So thank you. Howard, you're on.
Can I screen share?
Yes, you certainly can, sir. Thank you, Howard. And thank you for your patience with me.
Well, let me start here. So, as you're all aware, you've read any of the scientific journals or stayed up with the news, you know that we're in deep doo-doo, both economically and ecologically. And if you dig down deep enough into that doo-doo, you're going to find money. Now, money, as we've just learned, is created as debt. So it's really credit, not money. And it's credit used as money. But we could issue money as money, and that's what we were talking about. And that's what greenbacks were. But look at this. We got more debt than there is money, way more debt. And in fact, globally, it's 315 in the global debt. There's only 315 trillion in global debt, and there's only 85 trillion in money, in the entire global money supply. So you can see we have way more debt than money, and there's no way you're going to pay that debt since you have so little money. Seems like we're insolvent. The Princeton study on political influence, thinking about why this is, looked at the average citizen's preferences compared to the economic elite's preferences. And they discovered that money is the governing factor, as Christine Desan says. So money rules public policy. That in that Princeton study, there was a 10-year portion, that's the above graph there, and then the bottom one is a 5-year study. In the 10-year study, they just looked at the amount of spending over that time. And of course, you can see all of these big corporations, and the Finance Corporation, of course, is the largest donor. And as we know, the finance industry sits on the boards of all the rest of these corporations. And in fact, these corporations are somewhat what you might call profit centers for the banks, for the finance system. In the bottom graph, it's a 5-year study from 2009 to 2014. And of the 200 most politically active companies in America, and they spent $5.8 billion over that 5 years on influencing government. They got back $4.4 trillion. That is a 678% return on investment. They learned 300 years ago, 400 years ago, that investing in governments was by far their most profitable business, except for war. And of course, the reason they got control of governments was because of the war debt. I'll explain that later. As talking a little bit back in history here, a historian, Lord Acton, has a famous quote where he said, "Power corrupts." And when he was talking about that power that corrupts, he was talking about accumulated money. And so you can manipulate a market by a congressman if you got enough money, right? But absolute power, he was referring to the creation of money, the power to create it. And that corrupts absolutely. And of course, he said famously too, that the issue which has swept down the centuries and which will have to be fought sooner or later is the people versus the banks. Now, government doesn't need to get into the banking business. We don't need to nationalize the banks necessarily. The banking business is okay. The problem is they create money. So they need to get out of the governing business is the problem with them. Now, this is Margaret Chan, who was the former director of the World Health Organization, and she was asked about her funding and their priorities on their spending. How do they set their priorities? And she said, well, most of my organization's funding comes from private donors, and they decide what that funding is to be spent on. Well, we know that Bill Gates is the largest funder to the World Health Organization and does through several different avenues. And so he decides what it gets spent on. In other words, only money talks. And those who fund the WHO tell it what to do. But this is true not only of the WHO, but of nearly every public and private institution in the world, including governments. Right? And that was shown in the Princeton study. Now, I wanted to mention capitalism because this is what we call this economic system. And that word comes from a French word called capitalisme. And I'm not French, so I'm not sure that's pronounced properly, but capitalisme. And it refers to a system of war finance or the practice of borrowing large amounts of money for the cost of war. And it and that capitalism is an economic and political system based on private ownership and profit making, dominated by those with the power to create money. So capitalism equals capital equals money plus ism, which is a system, equals money system. So capitalism is a private money system, as we've been learning. It's what we call a centripetal system. That is, that it forces wealth and power to the center, like a hurricane, and often violent. What we want is a centrifugal system that spreads wealth out broadly from the center. And that would be a love-based system or a care-based system, as opposed to a fear-based system or gain. And of course, what do they fear? They fear of not enough to go around. So they want it all. And a care system, you see, is just simply a public money system. It's a care system because it is, instead of money created for personal gain, it's money created for public care. And this has tremendous psychological impact on people and can reverse the negative consequences of a usury-based money system that we have. And I believe that would happen fairly quickly once this was implemented. The proper role of money is to be a public distributive mechanism for society. Frederick Soddy, another one that folks might study about money. And he said in his preface of his book, Role of Money, to allow money to become a source of revenue to private issuers is to create first a secret and illicit arm of the government, and at last a rival power strong enough to ultimately overthrow all other forms of government. This is what we're up against today. Now I don't know if people are familiar with this graph, but this is a graph of the planetary boundaries prepared by Stockholm Resilience, I believe, from data around the world. And what it shows is that there are 9 planetary boundaries that we should not cross if we want to keep our planet viable. And we're already blowing past 4 of them. And so something needs to be done. Well, you may be familiar with this one too. This is Kate Raworth's donut economics scheme. And so we see it overlaid of the planetary boundaries, and we see the 4 that are being blown past, and those need to be reeled back in, you see. So that's investment going out in those things. That investment needs to be brought back into the green circle. And the social foundation, where we have many people that are below that, that needs investment. Take that investment from outside there and put it on the inside to bring them back up into the green circle, into the safe donut space where we have a sustainable economy and ecology. So I got a song about that. It's called Change the Money. And I'm going to take a drink first. So a fairly short presentation. I'd love to talk about money. I can go on and on and on about it, but I wanted to hear from folks what kind of questions they have about how this system works and what we can do to move it forward. And here's my song. The whole world is in trouble now. Everyone can see. Will human life continue? There's no guarantee. Understand the problem affecting me and you. We all need to focus on what we need to do, because the bankers create credit, all our money as debt. And that is what is causing the inequity we get. Concentrating all the wealth and power to a few. Don't you think it's high time we tried something new? So let's change the money. No better way to turn the world around now. Change the money. What's gone up now must come down. So change the money and make our future bright. It's all about the money now, and time to do it right. No more bursting bubbles, no bailing out the banks. Money for production, tell speculators no thanks. We could lower taxes, put money in everyone's pocket, and that would make the economy take off like a rocket, and we could have an economy in a steady state. No more worries over the unemployment rate. And no more corporate money choosing who we can elect. And no more corporate lobbies with a Congress we respect. When we change the money, I know a better way to turn the world around now. Change the money. What's gone up now must come down. So change the money and make our future bright. It's all about the money now. Time to do it right. Now I know you're all thinking of the possibilities. We could save the oceans and replant all the trees. Take up the quality of life beyond anything we've seen. And no more war and conflagrations, and all our systems green. When we change the money and turn the world around. Change the money. What's gone up now must come down. So change the money and make our future bright. It's all about the money. Now it's time to do it right.
Beautiful, Howard. Thank you. Beautiful.
All right. Yay. And yeah, so let's talk about the money. I have a whole thing about, our money system causes this economic growth. And a lot of people don't realize how the money system affects them every day. But, on average, 50% of the prices we pay for all the goods and services that we get is interest. It's capital cost going to the banks. So right there with the public money system, prices go down, interest rates go down, and debt starts to disappear. So that's what we need to do, because those are our problems that are causing so many more problems, because those with the power can make decisions that are not good for everybody. They're just good for themselves. They think they're good for themselves. They're really not good for themselves either, because usury has a very negative impact on people. It is, in fact, I consider it the sin of sins. It is the progenitor of the 7 deadly sins. And, and that's why the religions all banned it at one point. And of course, the power of money we see is how it can change things and corrupt religions, corrupt governments, corrupt people's relationships and everything. And so there's a lot of reasons why we need to change the money system. That's some of them.
And Howard, you wanted to get in the last word?
I was thinking, that growth imperative, as the money's created as interest-bearing debt, right? So they create the principal, they add the interest, so that what you're loaning is the debt's bigger than what you borrow. And then as the principal is paid off, that money's extinguished, while the interest that must come from the principal of another loan goes to profit the bank owners and into asset pools owned by the wealthy. And this is the systemic economic growth imperative. As society competes to pay the interest on its debts so as not to lose their collateral, because when loan payments, money destroyed, exceeds loans being made, money created, the system crashes into recession or depression for lack of money, and loans default. Now, this is by design and can be actually accomplished by banks just not lending. And they can, just agree to stop lending, and that creates a crash, which is what they did in 1929. And this has been called the business cycle, but it's really a monetary system cycle.
Well, we hope your detective work here at the University of Money has been interesting and productive for you. The report you give to others will be crucial. Please work with us so we can help each other create a healthy future for humanity. Looking forward to seeing you at the AMI conference. For Joe Polito, Gwen Hallsmith, Nick Egnatz, Howard Switzer, and myself, Stephen Walsh, thank you for attending, and let's stay in touch.